November 2021, Nepomniachtchi will take on Magnus Carlsen for the world title in Dubai. We're going to see how he did it. In this video, I'm going to cover two games. Firstly, Alexander Grischuk versus Giri. We're going to check that game out, and then we will look at Nepo versus MVL. Let's see how he did it. If it's your first time here, hello, my name is William. Let's begin. First up, Grischuk versus Giri. D4, knight f6. C4, e6, knight f3, b6. We have the Queen's Indian defense. Giri, he really needs at least a draw in this game, preferably a win, because he needs to catch up to Nepo. G3, bishop b7, bishop g2, couple of bishops competing against each other on this diagonal. Bishop b4 check. White blocks with the bishop, and c5. With a move like this, you plan to cause an imbalance, and that's exactly what happens. Bishop takes b4, take. You have this weird pawn structure on the queen side. One move you shouldn't play is this, because after take, then black really has no problems, and both of his bishops are just really well placed. He's going to strike in the center later with d5. White takes, castle. Castle, knight d2. In the future, white wants to go for e4. Maybe supported by a rook to e1, maybe queen c2 as well. Black plays d6. With a move like d6, if we check out a lot of black's pawns, they are on dark squares, so black is playing something called a dark square complex. You put your pawns on dark squares, and from that you can control dark squares yourself. Black can try and strike in center later with e5. Queen b3, you attack the pawn, a5, black defends at a3, trying to break up the structure, but knight a6, because if you take, then black can put his knight here. So white doesn't capture, he goes rook d1. Rook on the d file, queen out the way, and knight e1, offering a trade now with the bishops. The bishops come off, and h5. Black really has to win, so h5, h4, h3 is one way to go about that winning attempt. Knight c2. Knight needs to come back in the game, attacking the pawn here. Maybe the knight can also go to e3. Also, if it's white's move now, he's going to threaten to win a pawn. So black takes, take with the pawn, so then you stop a knight coming in here. Rook b8, you defend the pawn, and e4. So let's check out this central situation. A lot of control from, yeah, white's got 3 pawns, black has 2 pawns. If you strike, I push. If you strike, I push. So in the game, e5 was played, because if you play d5, the knight can come on c5, and it can sit very well on that spot. So if you go d5, then take e5, this is working out well for white. Knight e4, let's say. You can grab that, and then this pawn is really a weakness, so you can blockade it with knight e3, and in the future get that pawn rolling, get your rooks behind, and you help out. So after e4, e5, good move from Giri. e5, black plays on the dark squares, because if you go d5, then knight c5. The knight is on a very good outpost, so you don't want to do that. So white puts the queen in the center, keeping the tension, because if you take, then the knight can come in, and maybe knight f5 is there, knight c6, forking queen and rook. So white plays queen d3, knight c7, rook b1, attack the backward pawn, knight e6. Black is now challenging the center. d5, black really wants white to lock it up, so then he can put his knight on that spot. Rook b5, a couple of ideas with this rook swing. You're putting pressure here, so white is threatening to win a pawn. Take, and then take. Another idea is to double rooks on the b file. Rook b5, rook e8, h4, g6. So we get pawn chains on, well, for both kings. f3, controlling that square, knight d7 and knight f1. White now goes for a rerouting. Knight can go to e3 and then to d5. Listening to Giri speak afterwards in the interview, this is the maneuver, the plan that he missed. Knight f1, e takes d4, knight d4. So knight c6 is now a threat with a fork. Knight e5 first, attacking the queen. Queen moves out the way, get the knights off, and knight c6. Knight attacks the rook. Now, after rook d1, white has a great position. This rook plans to go in the center to attack the d6 pawn. And if we look at the structure, backward pawn b6, backward pawn d6, and isolated as well, whereas white's pawns are very healthy. Very nice chain here. So black has a lot of weaknesses. Queen e6, knight e3 coming into d5, knight e7 stopping that. Queen d2, lots of pressure now. 1-2 on d6, and black can defend passively, but black decided to strike in the center with f5. At the same time, this weakens his king. Queen takes d6. Not only that, he chucks the d6 pawn, but black needs to strike. Black is still trying to play for a win, but he is much worse due to the pawn weaknesses. Queen d6, knight c6. Offering a trade now with e takes f5, g takes f5 play. Now this was possible, but white is actually crashing through in style. Queen takes g6 check, king moves, let's say, and then f6. Now the rook can come in, but also the other idea is queen g7 mate. Really cool line pointed out by Grischuk in the interview. Queen e2 check, attacking king and rook. King cannot go back, or else you take the rook with check. King goes to h3, queen e6 check, g4. Really cool line. You block with g4 take and king g3, and on this spot there is no check. Can't check there due to the rook, can't check there due to the other rook, so the king is actually perfectly safe on g3. Rook b7, let's say, defending mate, but now you just mate with the queen. I know I mentioned a rook swing as an idea, but something more forceful, as pointed out by Grischuk in the interview. Queen h6 check, game over. If king f7, queen g7 is mate, totally boxed in by his own pieces, and if king g8, then rook g5, and it will be mate on the next move. E takes f5, take back with the pawn. The queen's now come off, and knight takes f5. 1 2 3 4 5. 1 2 3. Black is 2 pawns down, and white has attacking chances at the same time. Knight e5, rook d6, offering a rook trade. You're up a couple of pawns anyway. Rook goes back, knight now attacks this pawn, so rook d4 he defends, and then later you just get them moving. You got 3 against 1, time to go f4, g4 later. Knight c6, you attack the rook, rook can go back, stopping any check, that's why rook d2. Rook d8 offering a trade, take, and rook b6 is possible, but clean, he gets the file, and at the same time he offers a rook trade. The rooks come off, knight e5. Still, well, really, what's happened in the last 5 to 10 moves, pair of rooks have come off, and it is still 5 against 3. This is totally winning for white. Knight comes in, king comes in, knight b5, king in, knight check, king up, king to the side, knight b5, a lot of maneuvering, and finally Grischuk times at g4, take, game over. In the game, b5 played, knight c5, and black had enough. You're just going to get this moving. 2 against nothing. Once they come off, game over. So, because Grischuk beat Giri, that means Nepo, he only needs a draw. So then he gets to challenge Magnus in November. So let's check out that game. Nepo has white, MVL has black. Knight f3, knight f6, c4, b6. Already this is a surprise, because MVL, he plays the Grunfeld normally, g6, and knight c3, we can go d5, take. But he wanted to surprise Nepo, so after c4 he plays b6. Also MVL, he has to win to have any chance to win the candidates. g3, bishop b7, bishop g2. Just like in the other game, bishops competing against each other on this diagonal. g6, d4, bishop g7, so we have a double fianchetto. So let me explain the arrows. Couple of bishops slicing the board, but the reason this setup might not be so good for black is white has 2 central pawns. Black has less space, but it's important to create this kind of position for you because you have to win. So give your opponent some space and try to attack it later. d5. No messing about. Pawn forward just to shut out this bishop. Knight a6. I guess this is one disadvantage. When you push a pawn this early, you actually give your opponent this c5 square. Castle, and queen c2, good move. When you put your queen on this spot, you give yourself a couple of options. b3, bishop b2. So then even the bishops compete against each other. This bishop can also just come out. When you put a pawn here, then you get this pawn chain, but also you put a rook on d1. So a5, just to stop white playing b4. Rook d1, knight e8, bishop f4, knight c6. So really strange spot for the knight. Black plans to break up this kind of structure. You want to go e6, break it up. So their chances, with a knight on this spot, you're actually attacking c4. b3 played, rook e8, bishop e5, offering a trade, makes sense. Really, a draw is still a great result for Nepo going into the final round. Bishop here, offering a trade. e6, get their bishops off, rook b1. Slow build. Rook b1, you plan to go a3, b4, attack the knight on c5. e5. Knight d2 coming into e4, so black plays f5 to stop that a3. Queen f6, b4, you attack the knight. Pair pawns come off, knight a6, e4. Black now pushes with f4. You do not want to take, because after take, you got a monster knight on e4. c5 coming, d6 getting space. This is a terrible decision. So you play f4, gets more space, knight e2. Knight retreats, challenging the structure, so take, and now actually white takes away from the center. Normally you're told to capture towards the center, but after rook f8 there might be some chances. So f takes g3, the rook can actually come to f1, keeping the pawn structure symmetrical. White doesn't need to take too many chances. c5, locking up that side. Also c5 is very important, or else white would have played c5 and he just totally steamrolls the queen side. So black has to play c5 himself, take. He gets knight in the game, but the disadvantage to this is rook takes b6. This pawn is now hanging. White is a pawn up, but this pawn is not going to be easy to move. It is being blockaded by that knight. Queen d8, you attack the queen. So rook b1, double. And you attack this and this. Oh, hang on. If rook d6, what happens? I'm guessing the rook is trapped. Queen c7, probably. Wow. Yeah, queen c7, that's pretty cool. Totally just trapping the rook. So white doesn't fall for it. Rook b1 played, queen c7, knight c3. Rook back to b2 and knight back to d1. So a few retreating moves, fair enough. White doesn't have to win this game, but he is a upper pawn. He just brings his rooks back. Knight d1, rook b8. Rooks come off. Queen b2. Now the queens come off. So even black is saying, well, black is a pawn down, but this pawn really isn't going anywhere. Couple of knights defending it. King in the middle. Bishop now also defends. Lock it up, and really there's just no way through. This is a fantastic result for white, and that's how Jan Nepomniachtchi got his chance to take on Magnus for the world title in November later this year. A draw is agreed. Let's check out the final table now. Here we have the standings. Nepomniachtchi at the top with 8.5 out of 13, and Giri 7.5 out of 13. Tomorrow is the final round, but it doesn't matter, because even if Nepo loses and Giri wins, Nepo has a better tiebreak because he beat Giri in round 1 of the candidates. So that's why Nepo wins the tournament. We have Caruana on 7, Vache Lagrave on 7, Grischuk 6.5, Ding Liren 6, Wang Hao 5, and Alexenko 4.5. Here is YouTube's suggestion for what to watch next, but if you don't like their suggestion, here's mine. Magnus Carlsen's weakness. Carlsen plays Nepo.